Hey everyone, I just wanted to make a quick video going over RStudio because it's going to be the major way that you interact with R and sort of your coding environment or your place to code. So it'll be important to know and go through some of what these tabs are, set some settings. And so for example, later on, I'll show you some settings so that you can set your RStudio to look like this, change to the how things look completely. You know, appearances are everything and gotta look the part, gotta look like a coder. So you can set it to be whatever you want it to be. But we'll go over that later. First, sort of what is RStudio? And RStudio is an integrated development environment or an IDE. Most programming languages now have IDEs, but to kind of talk about what it would be like to program if you didn't have like an RStudio environment, you would use R, which looks like this for me. And you can see that this here is pretty much the same thing that's here, and we'll go over that in a little bit. But this is what R looks like, and you can code on the console and everything, but if you wanted to write a script, there's no place to do that here in RStudio. And what you would have to do is you'd have to write, get a text file, just all code is just a text file that a programming language can interpret in a sort of meaningful way. And so you'd get a text file, so you'd open up Notepad or whatever it is that you take notes on, and you can make a little R script. But then, you know, depending on the thing, you'd have to either source it to R, or there's not necessarily a good way for it for the text editor to communicate with R and show you like, oh yes, you did a typo, or this isn't gonna work. Whereas you can have an integrated environment, which is again the IDE, and you can make it work much nicer for you. And so this is what RStudio intends to be. And so there's 4 panes in RStudio. If you just open it up the first time, you probably only see 3, and that's because the fourth one is a little bit hidden because it's the script file. So if you go and you hit a new file here, it'll ask you if you want an R script, an R markdown, and some other things. You can even you can use RStudio to do to code in Python, as you can sort of see here. And we'll go over at least the difference between R Markdown and R Script in a different video. But if you just open up an R Script, you can see this is basically the same thing that I was showing you before as the text editor and the console, but they're now right next to each other. And not only that, you can very easily send, so if I want to do 1 plus 1, I can easily send this down to the console by hitting Control and Enter, or hitting the Run button here. If you hit the Run button, you can see I sent this down, and now R actually was able to interpret that and do something with it, and do the math and get to. So this bottom thing is the console page. There's other tabs for like if you could actually code through the terminal in RStudio. It's just if you wanted to have this convenient thing, it's there. But you're pretty much not going to use either any of these tabs. It's just going to be the console, and it's just going to be a way for you to interact with R here. You can, of course, just if you wanted to check something quickly, you could code here, like if you needed to know what, I don't know, 10 times 50 was, which is very obvious, but whatever. You can get these numbers out and you can start doing some coding and it'll show up here. Or, but the nice thing is, of course, when you're coding, the idea is that it's going to be reproducible. And so the main benefit is to have this coding section here where you put your code up on top here, run it, and you'll get it at the bottom. So you'll see that this is pretty much how you interact. Most of the time you're writing code up in this top part. You could even, errors and things like that will show up at the bottom, so it's nice to have the console open, but it's much more convenient to kind of have it limited. You can also clear the console space if you see that every time you start RStudio in R, it has this like really big thing where it's telling you about stuff that I never read. But if you hit Control L, or probably on a Mac Command L, you can actually clear the console and not look at that. But also with the console, you can hit up and you get the last thing that you entered in the console. So just some nice things there. But again, most of the coding you'll be doing is here, and then you can you'll do some code and then like set A to 0, and then if you hit Control Enter, you both run it down here, and it runs, and you can kind of see that there was a change here as well. Now, if you just write code, like if I'm like, oh, I didn't mean A to be 0, I wanted A to be 2, and I hit enter or just normal enter, you notice that it doesn't run down here. So you can, again, it doesn't automatically send it there. You have to actually either highlight it and hit run, or highlight it, hit control enter, or just as you, when you type it out, if you hit control enter, it will go to the new space and then also run it. And you can see now that A is set to B2. And then I can clear the console again with Control or Command L. So that's just a little introduction. We'll go over more coding basics and everything, and you'll basically just see that it pretty much only uses this area. But to talk about these other panes are particularly useful because they kind of show you, well, let's start at the bottom page. You see this files pane, and what it does is it shows you your home directory. You can set the home directory. I'll show you in that in a bit. It's in the same place. You change the color scheme, so I'll show you both of those at the same time. But what you can do actually here is pretty conveniently, you can browse and be like, oh, I want to go to my research file and look at some of the things there. Or if I wanted to go to the home directory and go to, there should be, oh, here it is. Let's say I had an Excel file or something. You could actually go to a folder in using this file management system or file viewer explorer, and you can find a full thing. And I was like, oh, I want this gene set enrichment analysis report, and I want to import it into RStudio so I can look at it and maybe manipulate it there. And you see that it's an Excel file, and we'll go over how you read in documents into RStudio. But if you're just starting, it can be really convenient to just click on it, and you can see that it says import dataset, which is nice and convenient. And it gives you a preview of what it will look like once it's imported. You can see like, oh yes, it's got the name set. It seems like these are the headers, which is appropriate, so I don't need to skip any lines, which is what this would be, is if I skipped, one and sort of previewed it, oh, well, it skipped the first line here, and it actually kept the data. But you can select a particular rows that you want, like you can change the sheet if there's an Excel sheet with multiple range values. It's not the best for sort of consistent, or if you're going to use this for a script, right, you want it to be reproducible. And so if you're going to use this, it's good to copy this code. So it's nice that you can get this preview and everything, but do copy it by hitting this or just going here, and it gives you a code, and it shows you that this, to read in an Excel file, for example, you need this read Excel package. We'll go into packages a little bit later, but it's just more functions. People make more functions and they can put them into packages, and that's what that is needed to, and the package is needed to use this read Excel thing. So you can copy that. You don't necessarily need the view. View is the preview that it's showing here, but you can copy at least this much. You can either hit import here, or you could bring it back to the R script, and let's say I want a new R script for this. I can paste it, and I could change the value that it is, but I can then run these two lines and it will read in this this table. You can also see that there's other things here. So that was the files, and kind of shows you the files and allows you to import things pretty nicely. You can make new folders and do renaming of things. So there's a little bit of functionality there as well. You have plots, and so if I wanted to plot something, and I'm going to make the most basic plot as possible, I'm going to say plot. As the x values, I'm going to go through 1 through 10, and the y values are going to be 1 through 10. The colon just means that I'm making a sequence where it's going to be, so it's the integer values 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And so what that's going to plot is just a little dot plot like this, not very fancy or anything. But what it's nice is that you can have this like plot thing, and you can resize it. So like if you had a lot of data, you could resize it to make it bigger. And then of course you can export it, you can save it as an image, or you can just copy it to the clipboard if you need it quick for a presentation or something like that. So nice and convenient to have that there. Packages are a way where I don't use the packages thing that much. You can kind of look at the packages that you have installed and say, and if you click it, it will put it into the library for you. It will load the package, that is. And if you see what happened here, it says library, that it loaded the package, and this is how you load it. You call the library function, and you put the name of the package in there, and then detach is a way to unload the package. So you can either do this if there are packages that are loaded, and you're like, oh, I need to not have these packages loaded for whatever reason, or load them. But it's better, again, to call them actually in the script here. So. But the other thing that's nice is that you can update packages and kind of just check all the packages that you have need for updates, which sometimes that can be really helpful. Help. So if you ever have a question about a function or something like that, so I actually don't know what abind the package does, or if you wanted to do, let's say, read Excel, we use that function already. If you put a question mark and then the name of a function, it'll go to a help page. And so now if I hit enter into the console here, it will actually bring up this help page here. And so it says, and this is really helpful for just checking things out. It's pretty much the first place you want to go through for a lot of things about what needs to be said and what needs to be there, because it will tell you what the description of it. Read Excel, read Excel documents. There's different types of they usually have related functions right next to each other. So there's read Excel, XLS, or XLSX, which I don't need to go over. This video isn't to explain that, but it might be helpful. You have a path. And kind of saying what that is. For those who aren't familiar, path is going to be basically, it's going to be the path is in your file directory, how you get to that folder. So I'm a Windows person, so if I look at any of these things, let's say if I go to a desktop and if I click up here, this whole thing, C, users, RFGRU, OneDrive, desktop, that is the path so if I wanted to use any document here or access this is the general path to the folder, the desktop folder, and if I wanted anything in particular, it would actually be using another slash and saying, any of these things that happen to be on my desktop. So that will be slightly important if you're, not familiar with it. But and that's what you need to know for like this read Excel thing. I didn't need to have more of a path for this read Excel thing because the current working directory is set to be this documents page. And that is something I think will be saved for another video about working directories, because we'll be using projects, and projects set your working directory for you. And so you get help. You can always close out of the help page, or also just like look for something else. So if I wanted to get a different thing, there's a function called C, which is really important, which we'll get into later. But it's a way to combine values into a vector or list. And so again, just a nice little thing. And then the viewer, I don't really know. The viewer will come into place if you ever do use an R Markdown documents. So that's important. Will be important for that. So to go through this panel, what's nice about this panel is that it shows you the things that you have already saved. So remember, I set A's value to 2, and I kind of forgot about that, but the nice thing is that RStudio remembered, and RStudio was able to tell me that, hey look, A already has a value of 2. So it's nice that you're able to check out these values. And the other thing is that it actually does separate values, which would be just setting a variable equal to something, or setting a variable equal to, let's say I wanted to be, and I was saying 1 through 10. What would that look like if I stored that as a variable? And you can see that it actually stores it as an integer variable vector, 1 through 10, but it's still a value, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So it's nice to do that. And then the nice thing about this as well is that you can very easily, if you wanted to view any of these, you could say like view um, and then GSEA report for blah, 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 blah. But you could also click on this button right here, and you can see what it shows here. It actually sent view this thing to the console, and it actually pops up here in the sort of scripts page generally, and shows you a table view of it as if you were looking at it in Excel or something like that. And so this could be a really nice way to just get a bearing on what your column names are, what kind of order they're in, what, like, maybe you just need to check it out for a little bit. There's other functions to do this, and it is not good to load this is pretty small table, 174 observations of 11 variables. It seems maybe a little bit large, but once you get into like thousands by thousands, like, you definitely don't want to click the view button, because it will probably make the computer crash, or take forever to load into because it'll have to load everything. So, but it's a nice little way of seeing the environment and what variables are currently set to, and to view them as well. You also have a history page. This is basically anything that has that you sent to the console. So let's say I mentioned that you don't really want to code from the console too much, because it's not saving the things you do, but it is in this history saving it. And so let's say, like, oh, I accidentally was doing some coding in the console, or did some error debugging or something like that, and I actually want to keep that. And then you could go through here and copy it, but if there was a couple lines of code that you wanted to copy, you can select multiple lines of code, and then you can either send it to console again, so that is to say, rerun this code, or you can click to source, and it puts it into a new R script for you. So kind of nice, not something I typically use. And the other thing that I wanted to point out is that new to the RStudio pretty recently, so if you've had downloaded RStudio before and you don't have this page, something you might want to look into, especially if you're new to RStudio and you want more of a tutorial, there's this learner package, and so you can click here to install it, or installing package generally goes, I'll do it up in the scripts here, it's install.packages, and then you'd put learn, I know how to spell R, and then if you hit Control Enter, it will send it down. It will start loading the package in, and downloading the files that you need for it. So that's kind of also a nice way to put a tutorial on, loading in packages or installing packages. But when that's downloaded and everything, I'm not actually sure what will show up here, but it's probably going to be something where RStudio does a good job of having documentations and stuff. So, and you can start tutorials about data basics and things like that. So another thing to go through, another resource. I'm sure it'll be very helpful. If you don't like how anything is, you can always resize it, and you've probably seen me do this already. And then you can also, these buttons is to basically minimize, to put it back up, or maximize it. So I'll probably be coding more so something like this, and this page is a little bit, depends on how many things I have in my environment, how much I want to see this, versus maybe I'm doing a lot of plotting, and so I want the plot page to be bigger. But you can always resize it. You can also edit the consoles. So if you click here, you can show all panes. So if you ever minimize something and you can't find it or can't seem to click it, if you just come back up here to this little box icon and click on it, you can always go back to showing all panes. You can move the console from the left to the right, and you also click on pane layout and change just where everything is. And also, if you see that there's multiple tabs, and so maybe you want the plot tab to be next to the environment, and you can do that, and you can hit apply. No, I don't want to restart RStudio, but you can hit apply, and then you can see that plots are, up here now. So, nice and convenient way to do things. And I think I'll have to restart RStudio to get it to look correct, or the way that I prefer. So the defaults are usually pretty good. If you want to save a script, so let's say you really liked this script here for some reason, you can click File as usual and hit Save. If you haven't named it before, it will automatically do a Save As, or you can just hit Save. There's also the save will save the current one, so it'll save Untitled 3, for example. Save as, buttons that you're probably familiar with. Let's see, the last thing I think that I want to show you, there is sort of other things that I encourage you to kind of go through, and you can, there's a lot of things that you can redo. Some of them are like rerunning previous, but you can actually do a lot of that from like just the run and doing it from here. But the settings that you want, to make sure you look like a coder and change other things, is this global options. So there's a couple of global options that I would highly recommend you change. So the first one being, so R version, don't change that. That's where R is. Default working directory, when not in a project. Again, project set your working directory, so that can be useful. But if you don't like where like the files are automatically, like maybe it's like, well, I don't need it to go and show like Dropbox and everything. I can go here and be like, I only want it to be in my research folder, and start there always. Again, I usually use projects, so it's not that important to me. You can also click to choose whether or not you want to restore on startup. One thing I would recommend you change is this, at least right here, save workspace to R data on exit. So what the workspace is kind of some of the environmental things that are loaded into the environment, and that can be really useful, but because again with I've actually had an issue with this, or I was working with someone who's having an issue with this, where they saved workspace image, which is what this will ask. It'll ask you to do it, and you can either say always or ask or never. I think the default is ask. And what ends up happening is that it tries to save the values that are here and bring it into your next session whenever you start RStudio again. And the problem with that ends up being that if you do something, so the person was working with some functions and creating some functions, and so they loaded in an old version of their function, and it created like a very interesting problem that, and also for reproducibility's sake, like it's probably best to not have things loaded into your environment unless you yourself load them in. Of course, if you're just working with something in particular, you could always save yes and then have it load into your environment. But I'd rather the default be never do save a workspace image, and then like if you know what you're doing and if you know that this is an appropriate use for you, then save a workspace image yourself, because you can do that as well. The other thing you can change, there's a lot of things you can change, but this is actually how you can also change the pane appearance as well. The main one that you'll want to, one is that you'll want to make sure that it can find the Git executable if you did download Git. If it, so hopefully all of you have downloaded Git by now, so it should have something here. So long as it has something here, you're probably good. You can also change the terminal if you're really interested. Again, you're probably not going to code from the terminal very often, but you can actually change the terminal to be, like for Windows, there's a command prompt and also the Windows PowerShell, so they're slightly different. But you can also, when you downloaded Git, you downloaded a Git bash, and so you can actually have the Git bash be the thing, which is a little bit more useful for me because that tends to be what I use, because I'm using Git and GitHub. And the last thing is the appearance page. So the appearance page is how you can set the zoom. You can also set it in different ways. I have it a little bit more zoomed in because I'm making these videos than I would normally would, but set that however you want. You can change the RStudio theme, which is not the main thing you probably want, is the editor theme. So if you choose any of these editor themes, they have all sorts of them already. You can also download some more, or you can play with the colors. There's other ways to do this, but you can also change the font if it's bothering you for some reason, and the font size. So, you know, and the nice thing about RStudio, I forgot to mention this, but the other thing about RStudio is if you notice in like when I had the text document up, like a text document doesn't change colors based on whether like what the item is in that you're typing. And so what you can see here is that functions in this RStudio theme are a particular color. They're orange in this case. You have your comments, which is a hashtag lets you write text, and for R to not interpret it or try to interpret it. Because if you were just to type out plotting of R objects, it should throw an error. And I'll get into that in a little bit more in a different video. But you have your functions that are a certain color. You have, you can see the quote marks a little bit easier. You can see your parentheses, and also you can see logical values of what they are set to be. So there's different things, different coloring schemes that you can choose. It is just generally nice to have it so that you can very clearly see when you're looking at code. Even over here in the default one, you see that like, oh, I see that this is a function library and detach is a library over here. But, I tend to like the darker themes, so I need to figure out what my old theme was, but get to that. Just hit apply, and then it'll do that, and okay. So it also, if you change some of the other settings, it might ask you to restart, and that's not usually a problem. But hopefully you found this useful and you found a couple of things new about RStudio.